Cast iron pans are inexpensive, practically indestructible, and they produce some of the best tasting food imaginable. And I know, if you're watching cooking videos on YouTube, you probably already know all about cast iron pans and most likely even own one yourself, but you may not be using it as much as you should be. My name is Charlie, and on this channel I show you how to make delicious food using simple ingredients and techniques. But today we're going to talk about cast iron pans, which are known for creating beautifully seared steaks, perfect burgers, cornbread with a crispy brown crust, along with a long list of other things. And the main reason that cast iron has this reputation is because it gets extremely hot and retains heat very well, better than pretty much any other pan material. So this means that a cast iron pan doesn't cool down significantly when you add food to it, whereas when you're using other types of pans, like aluminum for example, it can cool down by up to about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is very important for creating a good sear on meats like steak and chicken, because in order for the Maillard reaction to occur, which is what creates that nice flavorful browning on your food, you need to use a very hot pan. And of course, aside from that, the hotter your pan, the more quickly the outside of the meat can cook before the inside has a chance to overcook. But meat isn't the only food that benefits from being cooked in cast iron. It can also help to create a better crust on baked goods like cornbread, pies, and Dutch babies like the one I'm making here. And if you're not familiar, this Dutch baby is just a simple mixture of eggs, milk, flour, and sugar, which I blended in a food processor and then added to a preheated cast iron pan with some melted butter inside. Then, after about 25 minutes in the oven, we're left with a beautifully puffed, pancake-like pastry. And thanks to the cast iron pan, we were able to achieve a flavorful crispy brown crust on the outside, which creates a great contrast to the soft, cakey interior. Now, another benefit of cast iron is that it stays very consistent in temperature even throughout fluctuations in the cooking environment, which is especially important for home cooks because most home cooking devices like ovens and stoves cycle on and off periodically to maintain their temperature rather than staying on constantly. But again, since cast iron retains heat so well, that means that it heats up and cools down very slowly, which smooths out those fluctuations in temperature. Now finally, cast iron pans are also extremely versatile because they're made of one solid piece of metal, meaning that they're oven safe and they can be used on any cooking surface, including induction stovetops. And one of the best things about cast iron is that they can develop a non-stick surface without any chemical additives like Teflon, and this is achieved through a process known as seasoning. So if you're not familiar, seasoning a cast iron pan means to coat the pan with several very thin layers of oil, which then polymerize on the pan, creating a smooth, non-stick surface. And this seasoning can be achieved pretty easily just with normal use, followed by a quick maintenance routine. And that routine consists of rinsing and scraping out the pan, then heating it up to evaporate any excess liquid. Then you'll wipe it down with a thin layer of neutral oil and allow it to cool. So when properly maintained, cast iron pans actually get better with age as that seasoning builds up and the surface wears down and becomes more non-stick. And they're also nearly impossible to completely ruin, so a single pan should last your entire lifetime. The worst case scenario is really just that your pan starts to develop some rust, in which case you'd have to scrub it down to remove the rust, which would also remove your seasoning, so you'd then have to re-season it from scratch. But pretty much nothing you could do would damage the pan beyond repair. So with all of these benefits, you would think a pan like this would be expensive, but it's actually one of the cheapest pans out there. You can get a new one from a brand like Lodge for just about $20. And this video isn't sponsored, but Lodge is pretty much the most trusted brand out there when it comes to cast iron, and it's the brand that I use personally. But if you're lucky, you can even find a nice used cast iron pan at a thrift store or a yard sale. And in a lot of cases, you'll actually be better off that way, because again, a properly maintained cast iron pan will actually improve with age. So for that price, to get a pan that can cook pretty much anything and do it very well, you really can't beat that. But before you go out and replace all of your pans with cast iron, let's talk about the downsides, because although there aren't many, there are some downsides. The main one being that you have to be careful cooking with acidic liquids in cast iron, because when those acidic liquids are left in contact with the iron pan, they can actually degrade your seasoning and even cause some of the iron to leach flavor into your food. So I definitely wouldn't slow cook or braise with acidic liquids in a cast iron pan, and I would never use very acidic liquids like citrus juice, but you can still make quick sauces with slightly acidic liquids like wine without any issues. But that's really the only type of food that you can't cook in cast iron, so if you want to be as minimal as possible with your kitchen equipment, you can actually get away with just a cast iron pan, along with some type of stock pot or enameled Dutch oven. But of course, if you're a kitchen equipment enthusiast like I am, you may like buying new kitchen equipment, and so you may want to have a variety of pans anyways, even though cast iron is by far my most used one. But what I'm saying is that you could do it if you really wanted to. Now, cast iron pans are also pretty heavy, which is part of the reason that they retain heat so well, but if you prefer working with a pan that's lighter and more maneuverable, then cast iron probably isn't the best choice for you. And of course, you also have to perform maintenance after each use to avoid rusting and to maintain your seasoning, which we've already talked about, so again, the seasoning process doesn't take long, but it is something to consider. For me personally though, and I think a lot of home cooks would agree, that that's part of the joy of owning cast iron because you sort of become more intimate with your pan and you get the satisfaction of caring for it and seeing it improve over time. Now, the last disadvantage of cast iron is that contrary to popular belief, it actually tends to heat up unevenly because iron is a pretty poor conductor of heat. So when you're using cast iron on a stovetop, you'll want to make sure that your burner is large enough to heat the entire bottom surface of the pan, and you'll want to allow plenty of time for the pan to heat up. Now, alternatively, you can also preheat the pan in your oven before removing it back out to the stovetop, but of course that's a hassle and kind of a waste of electricity, so I don't think any of us want to deal with that on a regular basis. But again, as long as your stovetop burner is big enough, you won't have any issues. So I think that as home cooks, the more we can simplify our cooking process, the better. And if you can get one pan that practically does it all and does it better than most, to me that's a no-brainer as long as you don't mind spending a bit of extra time caring for it. So now, if you want to see how I use my cast iron pan to create a one-pot breakfast hash, be sure to click that video in the bottom right corner of the screen. It is a bit of an older video, so excuse the poor quality, but it is a recipe that I make all of the time, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.